Welcome to the DIL podcast. DIL means DHIL or Digital Health Innovations for Long Life. And it's great to see you again, Dr. Raghu, virtually. I think we have been working together for a very long time at Indian Institute of Public Health, so ex-colleagues as well. And as we broadly see, digital health is slowly coming out of public health institutions, much like IAPH,
Mm,
and coming out of engineering institutions also,
true.
and trying to come out as an independent school, perhaps, or an independent department. So, the broad idea of today's discussion is we are starting up India's first school of digital health. So, we would want to listen from your perspective.
Mm,
You have the twin distinction of not just being a public health professional, but also a physician.
mm,
So, to kind of get your perspective on public health
mm.
transitioning off to digital health, or perhaps like individual medicine transitioning off to digital health, and how to kind of design a curriculum where we can teach something meaningful to our students. These are broadly the points that we can perhaps like talk today or discuss. But before all these things, I think it would be great to know about your background, maybe the way that you grew up, your career pathway. So where did it all start? And if I can ask, when were you born? Where were you born? Can we start
Yeah,
from there?
yes, Suresh. I was born in the year 1974 in the city of Hyderabad. My parents were engineers, both of them engineers, but one of them took in the academic pathway, the other entered the corporate sector. I was born to Pampapati and Indira in the year 1974, and my hometown is Hyderabad. I did my schooling in St. Paul's High School, Hyderabad, just like any of us did at 10th and 12th. And subsequently, after my 12th, I entered the portals of Armed Forces Medical College, AFMC Pune. I did my MBBS from AFMC Pune till 1997. And post that, I joined the Maharashtra Public Service Commission's internship program and a 1-year fellowship program for doctors to enter their PG courses. So I did my initial public health work in a primary healthcare center in the district of Satara district. This was a place called Dahibadi, and Dahibadi was a rain drought area. So Satara district has got one part of it has got good rainfall, other one is drought prone. So this particular primary healthcare center had a lot of farming community who used to come with complaints of chronic chest conditions, infections, maybe a lot of sputum production, a lot of breathlessness. So these patients used to come to the primary healthcare center with respiratory conditions. And as it turned out, after the sputum testing, most of them suffered from tuberculosis. So since TB is still a large part of India's public health problem of importance, at that particular point of time, sputum testing was quite novel, and the government used to rigorously ask every patient to give the samples for testing. But what we found out was the data was not coming back to the primary healthcare system. How many had actually given the sputum, how many had tested positive, and among them what was the level of sputum grading was still not known to the local physician at the end of the testing. So during that 1 year of internship phase followed by the medical officership at primary healthcare center, the area of tuberculosis was an area where I wanted to work in the future, because a lot of patients were suffering from that particular condition in their primary healthcare center. So I worked in the primary healthcare center for about 5 years there, and subsequently, should I go ahead with my trajectory career pathway, Suresh?
Yes, please. I
Yeah, yeah.
think we want that on record, and that's essentially what we are looking for also.
Okay. So I did my medical officership in the district of Satara for 5 years there. And post that, since I wanted to understand the clinical treatment and management protocols for tuberculosis, I joined the local medical college chest disease residency program. At that particular point of time, it was called Diploma in TB and Chest Diseases. So I joined the diploma course because it was looking primarily at tuberculosis exclusively. So I did my diploma course there, and post the diploma course, I wanted to understand how new drugs are brought into the clinical paradigm pipeline. So to
And
one,
this was in which year, Raghu?
this was in 2002 to 2004. So
Okay.
97 I moved out from Armed Force Medical College, did my 5 years internship and medical officer in Satara. This was 2002 to 2004. I did my diploma in TB and chest medicine. But having understood the clinical management of tuberculosis cases, what I really wanted to understand was how new medicines come in the pipeline for tuberculosis. And I wanted to understand how drugs like the at that particular point of time in 2002 2004, new drugs for MDR tuberculosis, new treatment regimens were introduced by Government of India. So to understand the process of clinical trials, how trials are performed in patients suffering with tuberculosis, I joined the pharma industry for 2 years. And in the pharma industry, I understood how patients are recruited, how clinical trials are done for novel drugs, and also for off-label indications of drugs which are already in the pipeline. So these 2 years was in the Cipla and Unichem companies in Mumbai. And in these 2 years, I understood the good clinical practices of clinical trials. So my trajectory has moved now from clinical side to clinical trial management portfolio. At the end of it, when I came back and joined Public Health Foundation of India, at that particular point of time, there was a dearth of public health practitioners who specialize in data sciences and disease burden. So then I had applied to the Public Health Foundation.
Yeah, which year?
I joined PHFI in 2007, Suresh. And in 2006 ending, yeah, 2007 early part. I don't recollect right now, but towards the end of 2006 and beginning of 2007 now. So post my residency in tuberculosis from BJ Medical College, Pune in the year 2004, I joined the pharma industry for 2 years to understand what is clinical trials. And post that in the year 2006, there was a call for PHFI Future Faculty Program. PHFI had advertised across India to apply for this faculty program. So I joined PHFI in Jan of 2009, 2007, and then I was sent to Pittsburgh to undertake my master's in public health program with specialization in the field of infectious diseases and microbiology and epidemiology. So to understand how disease burdens are measured and to understand terms like quality adjusted life years and DALYs, I undertook this particular course with the intent to understand disease burden measurement and to understand how data can be brought into the realm of public health. How do people measure diseases? What is the metric that people often use in the field of public health for measurement sciences? Is what I wish to learn from the Graduate School of Public Health in Pittsburgh. So I came back in 2008 December. I finished my master's in public health from Graduate School of Public Health, University of Pittsburgh in USA, and I joined PHFI with the IIPH Hyderabad branch in December 2008. And since then, I've been running across this Master of Public Health program as a program coordinator in PHFI. But before MPH program at PHFI, we used to offer two courses. One was the Public Health Management course, and the second was PG Diploma in Biostats and Data Management. Since I was trained specifically in epidemiology and data sciences, I volunteered to be a coordinator for the Biostats and Data Management course. And for the initial cohort of 2010, 11, 12, 13, we offered the course, which is a 9-month duration diploma in Biostats and Epidemiology course. Now, since I have understood the importance of clinical sciences in tuberculosis and epidemiology disease burden in my public health career, I wanted to understand how clinical trial undertaken in village settings. So in our rural primary healthcare, there is some echo coming up. Is it okay if I go on, Suresh?
Yes, I guess so.
Yeah. So I've understood the clinical management of tuberculosis, and I've also got a fair broad understanding of how epidemiology helps in the field of public health. But what I was still lacking was how do you analyze data and how do you look at large-scale interventions for public health benefit. When we say interventions in public health, now clinical science is very clear. You have drug A and drug B which can be tested for safety and efficacy. But for public health large data sets in which interventions are being done at the level of village and villages and rural settings, you need to have interventions which will look at effectiveness and efficiency of the program. So to understand that, I undertook a PhD course in University of Cambridge, and this was looking at digital health for managing patients suffering with hypertension. So there was this concept of clinical decision support systems in which we advise the physician and the patient on what precautions or what management needs to be taken for managing hypertension. So all the frontline healthcare workers, be it the ASHA workers, the frontline healthcare workers, or the medical doctors working in the system, what we did was we randomized the primary healthcare centers into two different settings. One setting we gave the usual guidelines which the government of India gives for managing hypertension. But for the other primary healthcare centers, it was a cluster of primary healthcare centers in which we tried to give them a decision support system which allows the patient and the doctor to effectively manage their hypertension. So given the clinical load of any primary healthcare center, the amount of time a doctor spends on the patient is hardly 1 to 2 minutes per patient. So within that narrow period of window, the doctor has to take the history from the patient, enter the data into the system, and the system has to come up with a clinical decision support which says for this particular patient's risk profile, this particular drug has to be given. In my PhD, I undertook this complex step of trying to understand how these decision support systems can aid a patient's control of blood pressure. So this study was done from 2010 to 2013 in the district of Maharashtra in Telangana state, in which we randomized 16 primary healthcare centers for this intervention. So among those 16, 8 primary healthcare centers received the conventional clinical management guidelines for hypertension. And the other 8 primary healthcare centers received a netbook or a smartphone based on their local adaptability. And these netbooks were installed with a software in which the doctor can enter the details and get a recommendation. Say, for example, if the doctor enters the blood pressure value of 160 by 104 for the patient with a risk factor of tobacco, obesity, and alcohol. So for these given conditions, the system then looks into the reference engine and then gives out a recommendation which says for this risk profile, for these patients suffering with risk factors, this management needs to be given. So in this complex cluster intervention trial, we try to understand the benefit of using the clinical decision support system for patients' management of blood pressure. Now, post my PhD from University of Cambridge in 2013, I once again joined IIPH Hyderabad, and since then I've been a part of IIPH story. So that's the career nutshell in a nutshell, Suresh. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Raghu, for fairly explaining your career trajectory with a reasonable amount of detail. So it started off at Satara, which broadly I always thought it was a very kind of a foresty area. I think I drove through Satara once from Goa, I guess, but now you say that there's also a dry part. I think that's a bit of a news to me. But if you look at tuberculosis and the way that you kind of look at it from a physician's perspective, and then there are a lot of challenges with the patient, like for instance access and awareness of the disease itself, where they actually come relatively late to a physician itself for treatment, and then there are a lot of challenges with regard to diagnostics. You perhaps were a first-hand person to experience all those things, and then you kind of also were working in a tertiary care facility where you would have seen patients who have been relatively critically diseased with tuberculosis or perhaps other chest conditions. And then going to the pharmacy side, where you also started understanding how these new molecules are actually, I wouldn't call it as experimented, but rather trialed on, and the pathway it actually takes. It's actually a very long and a complex pathway that it actually takes to eventually reach the patient. And then getting on to the public health side on how to kind of design a trial, perhaps like understand the core epidemiology and the statistical reasoning and the collation of evidence, the analysis, and how to kind of interpret the results. And then perhaps like doing a similar study with hypertension where you are able to again kind of look at it from a physician's perspective and then identify perhaps like certain indicators which classify them as diseased, not diseased, and then tailor the treatment based on even more indicators that are more ecosystem related. So if you look at all these stages, one thing that always strikes to me is the time and the complexity and the multiple stakeholders that are always involved. It's never one person who actually kind of delivers everything. I think this is where, at least in my assumption, perhaps like the digital health platforms, I mean, these are almost like evolving day by day, can potentially help. So, for instance, let's start from the beginning. I mean, the patients unfortunately need to identify diseases at an early stage and perhaps come to the doctor. And that's where the biggest challenge lies because the later you come, which is when you actually feel like coming because for minor coughs or for small inconveniences you really don't want to go to a doctor. If that's the case, how do you think digital health platforms can maybe improve the awareness? We'll start from there.
I think, as you rightly pointed out, Suresh, two things are of paramount importance here. One is to understand the patient's history of disease, and second, as to how the digital health can help in screening. So, in terms of awareness, one of the very important tasks which is in front of us is to look at the complete trajectory of the disease spectrum and try to tell the patient the important risk factors for early detection, early screening. And then at that particular point, when you have good screening tests to catch them at an earlier stage, you can treat them much better. So digital health can also be used because we have various platforms now available with the local community, the local participants. It can be used to improve the awareness about risk factors for disease. Second, availability of screening tests to where the patients can get themselves tested. What are the available screening diagnostic tests available? Where can the patients avail those particular facilities? Can all be custom built, and thus messages can easily be sent to patients via smart media, via smart telephones, there are various platforms which all of us are very much aware, and you can use these platforms to again customize the message for that particular patient based on patient's health profile. And by saying patient's health profile, you have various tracking apps. Even your simple smartphone or your smartwatch captures your health data. So if the health data is anonymized, if it is kept confidential, and if the data's main points come to the server system, then we can customize whatever messages need to be sent to that particular patient. Say, for example, if it's a chronic smoker, message can go to that particular participant regarding the benefits of quitting and the harmful effects of not quitting. So both the pros and cons can be custom built. I mean, in short, it can be patient tailored. Specific references, recommendations can be sent to those patients by using the digital health platforms. That is one way of doing it.
Perhaps like maybe to expand on this, uh, the broad idea is at the level of the patient. Uh, do they actually speak the local language or do they actually speak English? Because it all looks fairly easy to say that we can send all these messages, but we are all taught medicine in English and we actually have to practice in a local language. And India officially has 22 languages. And then it becomes a lot challenging to translate all this content because even translating medical content becomes a little bit of a challenge. So, two very specific questions here. One, do you think the patients who came to you then and perhaps like maybe today, do you think all of them have smartphones or second question is, do you think they would understand English or it's just or only the local language that would work with them?
Yeah, I think for all patients, the local language is of paramount importance. So, the messages which are custom built in their language make a lot of sense to participants and to patients in general. So, when I say the messages are being sent across to patients, it should be in their specific language in which they speak, read, and understand that language very well. But medicine also works for the healthcare providers. For the healthcare providers who are aware of the English language, it can be sent across in English language. But for the patients, it has to be sent in their own vernacular script or vernacular language. That precautions, necessary things we should take from our side.
Yeah. Do they all have smartphones, or is it still an urban phenomenon in our country?
I think it has definitely improved over the past decade. Almost 90% of patients, at least one member in the family has got a smartphone. If not the participants or the patient, at least the family members have got a smartphone where people can view, download even videos and messages. So that percolation of smartphone has rapidly penetrated the Indian market.
Well, that's true. I think smartphones are not individual phones in our country. I think, at least in some segments of the society, it's still a what you call a family phone that needs
Family
to be
phone.
shared across. Uh, the next part of the question, I think uh, the people who you saw with tuberculosis signs and symptoms, I'm also assuming they would be suffering from other conditions, and their lifestyle, ecosystem, and most of them actually contribute to this condition. Just a kind of a straightforward question: why don't we screen them all for all conditions for all people? Is that even feasible, possible? I mean, would that be a necessity, or perhaps like, what do you think about it?
I think going forward from public health point of view, screening tools which screen the patient from head to toe are very much relevant because it makes sense to, but again, we have to be careful in trying to document what we are trying to screen for that particular condition. So you can have the important based on the country's profile of epidemics or disease burden. You can choose what things need to be screened for which treatment is available. So I would definitely concur with your point that we can screen them at one shot for multiple outcomes or multiple conditions. It makes sense because the burden on the healthcare system will sufficiently come down. And as you rightly pointed out, the more we screen at an earlier stage, the better it is for the patient to get treatment.
So let's assume that we have a village here with 1,000 people, and then we are screening everybody, and then you have all the necessary data that you actually want, and as I mentioned, all the necessary data only, not the perhaps like not so necessary data also, and maybe we have data about their living conditions also, their local ecosystem, and perhaps like village data. On one side we are actually screening individuals, on the other side if you aggregate all the data, that is kind of considered as public health data. So what's the difference here? I mean, what's the difference between public health and so-called individual medicine?
Yeah, I think public health works on one fundamental dictum, which is greatest good for the greatest number. So for the community, what works for the community's benefit is the viewpoint of a public health practitioner. From an individual clinical point of view, it's only that particular patient's condition which needs to be treated. But public health looks at the community's benefit. So that's a fundamental difference between clinical and public health disciplines.
Well, from a digital health perspective, why can't we have both? I mean, I do understand that our country perhaps like went through or maybe still going through resource challenges, so we needed to prioritize. But assuming that there is not much of limitation of resources, or perhaps you have a platform where, as I mentioned, everybody is screened, everything is available. On one side, you can drill down and look at the individual person's data, perhaps provide customized services. On the other side, you can also look at what is best for the community, and then perhaps like make changes at community level, maybe make some changes at in aggregate or some small cluster level also. If all these things are possible, do you think this kind of dichotomy between individual health and community health would still be there, or is it still relevant?
I think that is no more valid provided you make solutions which are working for the community and for the patient in general. So that dichotomy of trying to provide services to individual or to community is no more there. Because as you rightly have pointed out, we don't live in a single ecosystem. We live in a biosphere. Ecosystem has got multiple determinants. It could be environmental, it could be, say, local patient specific risk factors, it could be occupational, it could be behavioral sciences. So tackling multiple elements is what public health looks at. On the other hand, clinical science looks at clinical signs and symptoms, which also can be tackled. So if you can provide solutions which are much more cost effective, it definitely does make sense to tackle both at the same front. One shot, two birds, no?
That's true. I mean, why don't we add a few more birds also now that you mentioned environment? Why don't we bring in One Health into this? Uh, we just went through a very kind of a severe pandemic, perhaps like something that we wouldn't perhaps like forget in our lifetime. So
Mm.
if we also, and it doesn't look like it's going to be the only pandemic, not that I'm wishing for one, but it's also a respiratory infection. And
Mm.
there are lots of challenges with regard to environmental health, not just in the form of pandemics, but also there is worsening air quality or there is increasing discussion on air quality. So if you look at a lot of environmental issues, again, it's the respiratory system that actually bears the brunt of most of this. So how do we kind of look at it from a public health perspective, and how do we look at it from an individual health perspective? And perhaps like the third perspective would be how do we try to bring them together from a digital health perspective? So what would be your comments on it?
Yeah, I think if you look at the milestones in public health, we moved from individual to community to different stakeholders to community centered practices. But often in the last 10 years, we have seen a lot of traction happening in the One Health domain, which is trying to understand that health doesn't happen in isolation. It is affected by multiple stakeholders, by multiple domains. So using the One Health platform to integrate public health is very much welcome. But as I mentioned earlier, we just need to look at solutions which are cost effective, which is very much the need of the hour. Because a lot of governments in the public health sector, a lot of NGOs, CSR foundations are looking at approaches which tackle multiple issues within the same given budget. Because the budgets are constrained, the time is, the resources are very much tightened now. So therefore, tackling with a One Health approach does make a lot of sense to public health. At the same time, we also need to be aware that most of the health is again driven by individual habits. So, taking abundant caution to cover the lifestyle perspective of the patient and the broader ecosphere is very much required from public health point of view.
Yes, I mean, as you rightly said, at the end of the day, it all comes down to how much does it cost.
Mm.
Uh, but perhaps, like one way of looking at it, the cost perspective is if the denominator also increases, then
Mm.
the broad kind of result kind of makes. I mean, the cost really does not come down, the overall cost. But at least if you are able to serve more people, which can potentially be done on a digital platform, the per person cost would perhaps like fall down drastically, and maybe that's one reason where we can think about considering a single platform for multiple
Mm.
disease conditions. As you rightly mentioned, maybe do a head to toe screening that is relevant for that community, and perhaps also do the screening for One Health indicators.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the intervention part, because at the end of the day, people really want to know, or want to kind of be better and get on with their daily lives.
Mm.
So, what kind of interventions can be kind of presented on a digital platform that people can actually follow? Because a lot of these things are usually conveyed to the patients, but there is a serious challenge with
Mm.
acceptance and then following up these interventions. How do we improve on the acceptance of the interventions?
I think that's a $1 million question, Suresh. But going forward, I mean, what public health practitioners in the Western world and of course in our world, in our part of the ecosystem also trying to prove is that for interventions which are working for the population, we need to look at the ownership from the community. If the community's ownership is there for that particular intervention, then it becomes much more acceptable for the community. The participants understand the nuances of why these interventions are working, and going forward in the longer run they'll be much more sustainable. So therefore, these interventions which are centered towards the community, which are owned by the community, which are run and driven by the community, are those things which will run in the longer run. Digital health can allow us to bring all the stakeholders into one platform, and with a single point of target, you can customize your messages to different stakeholders and bring them into the common platform, and then allow the interventions to run their own course of life.
Well, you also had a substantial experience in the pharma world where
Mm.
you worked with perhaps like two of the top Indian pharma companies.
Mm.
Pharma companies seem to have a wonderful kind of a way to convince the stakeholders. I wouldn't kind of put physicians in the mix, but convince the stakeholders to perhaps like maybe what you call use their products.
Mm.
Is there any of those maybe techniques that we can bring to perhaps like make community or the individual follow up the interventions that we prescribe?
True. I think what works in public health domain is repeated messages. See,
Okay.
the same intervention may not work if you say it the very first time. But if the messages come from their own family members in a time-bound manner, at least some percolation goes down to the individual. There's a very, very famous intervention called the health belief model, in which any patient who, I mean, of course, you're also aware of it, people pass through various stages of pre-contemplation, contemplation, then they go into actionable phase, then maintenance and long-term run. So in this cycle chain, if messages are sent across to participants, which are time bound and repeated at that particular stage at which the individual is there, then these interventions will work in the longer run, is my humble take on this.
That's actually perfectly right. I mean, at least even from the perspective of digital services,
Mm.
where the more frequent you are touch basing with the your so-called end client, the more valuable your service actually is.
Yes.
If you are like serving once in a year versus you are serving on a daily basis, or perhaps like through WhatsApp you are serving
That
for
makes a big
several hours
difference.
a day, or through social media where people are hooked onto it for several hours. That's essentially the whole value of the platform, increasing the frequency, making it stick, making it more usable. I think these are some of the elements that we need to consider for healthcare also, so that people actually uh, take up these interventions more and more.
The
Uh,
second thing before you go on, Suresh, is what the pharma industry has taught us is to go by SOP practices. So they have the protocols in place. There are standard procedures which they follow in a regular time-bound manner, and they take it to the market once they run that particular circuit process. So they get permission from regulatory authorities only if they have documented their findings in a systematic way. So similarly, digital health needs to make sure that the practices are well documented, there is transparency in their documentation, and there is a rigorous SOP practice which is uh, not only followed but also monitored and evaluated at frequent intervals.
well, structure and standards. I think
Yeah,
digital health needs
rightly
a
said.
lot of
Yeah.
them. In fact, like as they are evolving, and in fact, that's one space where I see huge potential for India to take the lead. From the pharma perspective, although we have a huge pharmaceutical industry here, we haven't actually come out with an innovative molecule all on our own. But on the digital health side, since we have the advantage of population and the humongous amounts of data that we can actually generate with the diversity that can actually help build better digital services, I think the challenge is in coming out with these standards. For example, if you take a chest X-ray anywhere in the world, it's standardized. I mean, the distance between the machine and the patient, the way the person actually positions himself, and perhaps like maybe the way the healthcare personnel also attends to the patient, everything is more or less standardized.
Right,
But
right.
Yeah, but if we are able to, or if you are trying to do something on a digital platform, this is where either there is still a substantial human interference. For instance, if you are taking a blood pressure, a human being is actually taking a blood pressure. What is actually getting captured is only the final reading. It's not an entirely digital service. Or if you take a image of a patient, like let's say maybe you take a 30-second video of a patient uh, having a cough or having wheezing.
Mm.
I mean, if you miss the position or if you don't do it properly, then you are actually missing the whole signs and symptoms. So, standardization is actually required a lot, and this is where academic institutions like us can perhaps like collaborate and bring in the same rigor that pharma industry has with regard to standardization. So I think we have had a substantial discussion on uh, your life course, starting from a general physician or a primary care physician at Satara, all the way to faculty at PHFI, and going through the master's, PhD, the diploma. You have also been a great teacher. I think that is something that I hear from the fellow students, not you, perhaps. Like
Yeah,
how
I think it runs in the family, Suresh. My parents are teachers, so that's also an area. Yeah.
well, I would say you are still continuing the family tradition in a great way. So coming back to perhaps like the question, there's a lot to teach the so-called newer generation of students. How do we teach? What do we teach? If we have to build a curriculum on digital health, can you please tell us perhaps like two or three things, or if you want more, on what can we actually teach the students along with the healthcare competencies that we need to anyway teach them?
I think gone are those days where you teach them in a theory-based structure. Today it's all hands-on, practical. So the more the student is exposed to the industry, the more internships he or she undergoes through, the more field campaigns they undertake on a specific deliverable is what they should learn. Of course, we can define the skills and competencies of digital public health and digital health for students. But what is of great importance is to make them industry and community ready, community centric specificity. So, being industry ready or being ready for the corporate world or for the digital world means at least three or four important things. One is technical know how, which of course they will pick up with practice and with experience. But the much more important area other than technical is team building skill, because in digital world, as of you would have realized by now, most of us have realized it is not, you don't work in isolation, you work in a team, and you have to draw from different people across different spectrums of life. The same digital person has to deal with the patient, with the practitioner, with the healthcare provider, with the policy people. So, how do you work in this ecosystem of managing multiple stakeholders is something that they should be taught on, and students should practice on those soft skills. The third important thing is data sciences. I mean, that's a very important field of digital health, and you need to visualize your data. By data science, I don't mean coding, I don't mean coders who can draw those things. What I mean is trying to make sense of data in simple infographics. So, a lot of digital health practitioners are still raw in trying to understand data. They understand data to themselves and they can explain to their colleagues, to their teachers. But the beauty of a digital practitioner is he or she should go to the community and explain what it means. So that skill also has to be taught by our teachers in our curriculum. So technical know-how. Second is working across different sectors, different stakeholders, team building exercises. And the third important thing is ethical values. Ethical values in digital world are often neglected, and we take them, I mean, very lightly. But going forward with HIPAA law also becoming across medium spectrum also, privacy laws will become much more tougher, and you should have an ethical nuance in trying to understand what is digital data, what is private, what is not private, what can be kept in the public domain, and if it is kept in the public domain, what are the consequences of it. These things students have to have a clear understanding on that. Rest of technical skills they'll pick up when they work, but things like team working, understanding how to work with different people, Understanding what is ethics in digital health is something that they should be very well made aware of in their bachelor's or master's courses in digital health.
Well, I'll try to kind of summarize just in case. Uh, One is they should learn the hard skills,
Yeah.
not just the technologies, but rather application based skills.
Mm.
They should have substantial hands on experience
Right.
in context in the community or wherever these applications are actually used. They should have substantial soft skills to perhaps work with this stakeholder team, otherwise it becomes extremely challenging.
Right.
And they should have really good understanding of regulatory environment, otherwise
Right.
it's not perhaps really good. I mean, you cannot these days say I do not know. That's kind of not allowed. You are supposed to know. And you are also kind of need to have substantial amount of empathy and understanding on how things are actually running from the patient perspective. And you should have a deep sense of ethical values on how you are actually developing and delivering services. So these are some of the areas I think we need to focus on. Anything else you would want to add, Raghu?
I think we have fairly covered the broad areas. One other thing which again, which of course I have alluded to, is trying to make sense of data in layman's language.
Yes, visualization of data
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
And
Infographication
being
data.
able to not just analyze but also convey actually what it means to the stakeholders in healthcare system. And healthcare actually has the distinction of perhaps like having the
Hmm.
so-called widest gradient of stakeholders. On one side, you would be meeting a patient from Satara
Hmm.
who may or may not know how to read and write in English. Perhaps like he's a laborer in a farm. And on the other side, you are perhaps like working in a specialty hospital, super specialty hospital, in a clinical trial center where maybe everybody has a PhD.
Hmm.
And then you're talking to district admission officials. Some of them are civil service people, some of them are, politicians. And then you are also working in a very high tech facility, perhaps like thinking on how to design drugs, or maybe thinking of developing high tech software, also thinking about security. So all these things usually does not happen in other areas. So if you are let's say a rocket scientist, you are not going to talk to anybody other than a rocket scientist, or maybe a very small group. So healthcare is very challenging, especially on the human front. So trying to figure out how to work with people and then successfully working with people is what makes a good teacher, runs in your blood, and perhaps makes a good doctor also.
Hmm.
Uh, but I'd also want to know a little bit about your personal taste, wishes. Um, can you tell what is your favorite cuisine?
I like Andhra food. I like spicy food. So I like the coastal flavors of masalas in my tea also. So it is. I mean, I'm mostly a traditional homebound food cuisine. The other cuisine
Yeah,
which I like is
yeah, we all
again.
can agree that we like our wife's food.
Yeah. True. No doubt about it. Wives and mothers' food also. Yeah.
Yes.
The other cuisine which I sometimes love to partake is the Chinese cuisine. Of course, there's nothing called Chinese in our Indian food. It's Indian Chinese food or Chinese Indian food. It's a mix of those. But I like Chinese food. I like to experiment with different flavors in the traditional Chinese meals.
You're also fairly well traveled. Which country do you like to really go, perhaps like for a visit, or go again and maybe experience it a bit more?
I think it will be Indonesia because the beauty and breadth of ethnicity of people, of different customs, of different places to look around is fascinating. Even the northeast of India is quite good in that particular domain. But the country which I would love to again go back and again revisit would definitely be New Zealand. It is a very scenic, very beautiful. I mean, and you can travel alone, silo. I mean, it's quite safe, quite convenient. It's also not heavy on your pocket if you substantially go on the what do you call OYO platforms or Airbnb platforms. So that way, if you budget it out, it's a good country to visit, New Zealand.
Well, let me see if I can give it a try at some point in time. But
Sure.
Indonesia, yes, I think great food again in Indonesia. Northeast, well,
Mm,
thankfully I've lived there for a few months, so yes, I
mm,
can definitely vouch for that. In fact, I've driven here from
mm.
Hyderabad to Arunachal,
All the way
perhaps
to
even
Arunachal. Mhm,
yes. I was there at Assam Kaziranga University for a
mm,
few months, so
mm,
I think it's a great place to be.
mm.
Thanks a lot for sharing your good experience and also helping us to design our digital health school curriculum in a much better way. So we will try
Likewise,
to
Suresh.
integrate all the points. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Suresh. Always a pleasure to interact and talk to you.